For more on how our kids are coping, let's bring in NBC News national reporter Erin Einhorn, who took an in-depth look at what's changed since March when the virus closed nearly every school in the country. Erin, is your research echoing what those students are saying? Words like stress, pressure, loss, that student in Chicago brought to tears. Is this all basically striking the same chord to what you're learning?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what I was really struck by in hearing all of those kids just now is how the focus has been on, okay, we need to get kids back to school. We need to get the virus under control. We need to get back to our normal. And what I think we also need to talk about is whether there is a going back to normal, because we can get a vaccine, we can become immune to the virus, but there's extensive damage that's already been done. Kids have lost lots of education. They've experienced trauma. They've experienced loss and grief. They've, hunger. I mean, the number of children who are experiencing hunger and homelessness, and their parents have lost their jobs and they've lost loved ones. And they've been doing this all on their own, isolated in their rooms. And rates of depression and anxiety are way up among children. And something like 3 million children aren't in school at all. I mean, as far as the difficulty of connecting with the remote learning is difficult. But then there's also kids who, major school districts are showing their enrollment numbers way down. So you have lots and lots of children who aren't getting an education at all. And we can't just go back and say, okay, it's all fixed now. Let's go back to what we had before, the schools we had before, funding we had before, the programs we had before. The experts I was speaking with are talking about how what we need is a real plan to figure out how are we going to address all of the deficits and all of the needs and all of the trauma in order to really make it possible to eventually go back to the lives we had before.
I mean, we know how difficult this has been on adults, right? Every day feeling the same, maybe stressed about money, somebody sick in your family. But these kids, they need mental health help. There are some serious needs right now. Long term, what do those issues look like?
Yeah, I mean, children experience children are experiencing all of this crisis without the experience of older folks who may have lived through other things and realize, okay, this is temporary and I just need to get through. And they're experiencing, this seems to a lot of kids like this could be the end of the world, and they're stuck in the room and they don't have their friends and they don't have their teachers and they don't have the other, the sports or the programs they used to be involved with. And so it's, and we know that trauma builds on trauma. You experience one trauma, early in your life, and something happens later that makes you kind of relive some of those other experiences. And so, really, really difficult things going on. And the metaphor a lot of folks are using, and a lot of the people I talk to, the experts, are talking about, it's similar to a hurricane, right? So the hurricane comes through and it knocks everything down. And then, after a day or so, the rain stops and you go back in. But, you have to rebuild more than just the houses, right? And you have to, the institutions and the community and all of those other things, you need to rebuild them. And we have a lot of work to do, I think.
Yeah, and the focus has been, let's get the kids back to the classrooms, and we want that to happen. But once that does happen, we're talking about huge learning gaps. I mean, that expert in Rahima's story said, we're not talking about an entire lost year, but we're talking about huge learning gaps here. So these teachers, it's not like they're going to be picking back up where they normally would in a spring semester. What kind of comprehensive plan do we need?
Well, and I think what's going to be really challenging for teachers is that those learning gaps aren't going to be equal, right? There are some kids who are connecting, there are some kids who are rocking online school and are connecting, and there's actually, half the schools in the country are open and those, kids are in the classroom. So you have kids who are in the classroom who are getting a good education. You have some kids, who prefer the online for some reason, but then you have lots of other kids who aren't getting their needs met, kids with special needs, English language learners who need special programs that are more difficult to convey through the online instruction. And then, so you need a plan to sort of help all those people who didn't get what they needed this year, the kids who are in an online program, but they don't have internet access. So those kids are going to have deeper deficits than some of their peers. And so teachers really need a plan. So we can't go back to our old ways of teaching. We're going to need new ways that meet children where they are.
All of you can learn much more on Erin's reporting at NBCnews.com. Erin Einhorn, thanks so much for your time today.